Social Services, and they gave me just a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about disaster case management. We do have quite a few disaster case management providers in the room. Everybody raise your hands. Yay, we couldn't do the work without them. But my purpose is not to give you an overview of what disaster case management is. It's to tell you about how we want to identify new providers, because we never know when the next disaster is going to happen. Basically, what is DCMP? It's a disaster case management program that comes into play when we get a presidentially declared disaster and individual assistance is granted by FEMA. At that time, the Department of Social Services, which is one of the, this is our emergency function besides mass care and shelter, my other people from the same branch, disaster case management can be applied for the federal government. And we have to locate providers, nonprofit organizations throughout the state that can help us deliver disaster case management services. So as you know, we have 58 counties. Well, I don't have providers in every county. And that's what my goal here is, just to briefly tell you about it. If your organization or sister organizations would like to be involved, I'll give you the contact information. Basically, we're a supplemental program. The state provides some of the funding for our state staff, and then we contract for the last 9 disasters with a management agency, which has been Catholic Charities of California, and then they contract with providers in the local areas. Now, in past fires, we had a lot of already established providers that were willing to step up. But for our atmospheric rivers, we got hit with a bunch of counties who had never done this before. And so we saw the need that we need to identify providers in the area that are willing to contract with us to help give services to the organization, not to the survivors in their areas, to deal with their language needs, to be part of the community. So this is what I wanted to talk to you about.
Point this way.
There we go. Point this way. So what I put out is a notice of interest, and this is to just identify nonprofit organizations that want to be a part of our organization when a disaster happens. We have no funding for it now. It's not going under a contract. It's just establishing a list of possible providers that are willing to do disaster case management. If a disaster hits any county within the state, we have to find ones in that county to help, because people from the community are best to serve. So right up here it says notice of interest. If you're interested in finding out more, please just email us at dcmp@dss.ca.gov and I can send you the notice of interest. And all I'm asking is for organizations, are you willing to be a part of our response if it happens? Because as we know, this in the Bay Area, we can have earthquakes at any time. So thank you very much, and thank you for letting me squeeze it in.
Appreciate that.
All right, so we're going to get started. This is our session 3 on recovery. We're going to be talking about different facets of long-term recovery. It is a complicated subject, and it is not something that most of us willingly want to know how to do. I think that's a fair statement. It's something you have to do to help your community return to normal. So introducing myself again, my name is Valerie Brown, Deputy ED of United Policy Members. I am the current chair of the Santa Cruz County 2020 CZU Fire Long-Term Recovery Group. I just got a board installed for the San Diego January 2024 flooding, and I'm also a board member of the disaster leadership team that focuses nationwide on mentoring groups in long-term recovery. Which is all to say, I know a little bit about long-term recovery, and I will not pretend to know it all. But it makes me very willing to be the person facilitating today's conversation. So we are going to start with our first panelists. And panelists, they will be sitting down later, but for now they're going to be at the podium. We have Tonje Switzer, the Executive Director of the Santa Cruz County Long-Term Recovery Group. And I will be your Vanna, and I will click your slides.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and I feel honored to speak to you. I'm certainly not a veteran in this field like so many others that have spoken before today. My name is Tonje Switzer. I am the Executive Director of the Long-Term Recovery Group of St. Cruz County. I came into this work through both working in nonprofit social services in Santa Cruz County with community bridges, and also being personally impacted by the CCU fire where my family lost their home. So it was sort of a natural step for me to already working with these communities and working with one of the organizations that ended up doing disaster case management, to then working in the field as well. I was not part of the long-term recovery group initially because I was concerned with my own recovery. But I did work with the standing up of the disaster case management program at Community Bridges, and ended up being sort of looped into the long-term recovery group about a year into the recovery process. I wanted to talk a little bit about the cycle of disaster, which many of you are familiar with. So we do have sort of a warning and anticipation period. There's sort of a space missing there that a lot of you have talked about, which is the preparedness and mitigation part that comes in the blue sky period. So it happens throughout the cycle, but really, we're doing it now. We're in long-term recovery group, but we're also preparing for the future disasters. And then we have the warning and the anticipation. We know there's a red flag warning, right? It's going to be hot, it's going to be dry, it's going to be windy, or there's going to be, a lot of rainfall, wind. And so we're anticipating, we're making sure that we have all the alerts set up on our phones. And then when we have an impact and disaster, we go into evacuations. Emergency response teams are evacuated, and there are sometimes search and rescue operations included. After the aftermath of the disaster includes damage assessment, needs assessment, and initial recovery efforts. And then we have relief and remedy with immediate aid and assistance, provisions of basic necessities such as food, water, and shelter, medical care, and psychological support. We also have short-term recovery, which has to do with providing intermediate housing. And then the long-term recovery is rebuilding infrastructure, rebuilding homes, and working on hazard mitigation and future preparedness. Next slide, please. There is a cycle to the responses. We have the immediate response is the initial response with search and rescue, providing immediate needs for immediate needs. The insurance and personal resources, so helping families accessing their insurance information, understanding their policies, helping them access any funding they may have. They may have left their homes without any, without their wallets, without their phones. And also providing emergency funds, which often takes the form of, $500 Visa cards or gift cards, things like that. FEMA then comes in with immediate reliefs, which is often $500 to $1,000 right away. And again, offering counseling services and things like that. We've already talked about SBA, which is Small Business Administration. I want to save my dollars for. Okay, thank you. You're prepared. And then comes the FEMA programs with recovery support. I want to mention something which you may not be aware of. I actually talked to somebody today that was not aware of it. There is actually federal funding right now. It's called Recover California. It's coming through the state housing and community development. It's up to $500,000 to rebuild homes for families that were impacted by 9 counties that were impacted by catastrophic wildfire events in 2020. So Santa Cruz County is one of those. So we're not only trying to help families recover through our programs, but we're also connecting them with the state program, because recovery is not linear. It's not going to look the same for everybody. And so we want to make sure that we know about all the resources available, and we can point people to them and help them apply for and move through that approval process for the programs that fit best for their situation. And then for the long-term support, the long-term recovery, we have it's a collaborative effort, right? And so we talk about the VOADs. The long-term recovery group is sort of a mini VOAD in a way. It is connecting government and local organizations and community groups with helping connect all of those together so that we can connect impacted households with the resources available. On the next slide, it's interesting to me what this looks like, because this is really like a VOAD. This is what a VOAD structure looks like. In a VOAD structure, you would have one of those balls outside of the steering committee or the board. You would have a circle that is called long-term recovery group. So when you then have a disaster, that ball sort of pops out and becomes its own entity, and that is what a long-term recovery group is. It has the majority of the other functions that a VOAD would have. So you have, donations management, you have volunteer coordination, you have, for the NorCal VOAD, we have construction committee, communication, community assessments, all of those things are really important. And then I added some on the slide there as well. I ran out of space for my bubbles, honestly. But spiritual and emotional care is extremely important. So connecting with your church communities, making sure there's counselors available to talk to people about, the crisis that they're experiencing. Advocacy, and I'm looking at Dave Reed when I say that, because there's a lot of advocacy conversations that's going back and forth, and that's very much connected to the community assessment committee, or sort of the being connected to the community, understanding what are the needs of the community, and how can we effectively communicate that back to government or other entities that can support us in making changes, changing policies, maybe directing funding where it needs to go, so that we can be more effective in the work that we do. Housing support and unmet needs roundtable. Unmet needs roundtable is where the funding comes in, and where the disaster case managers, and I'm looking at several of them that are part of our long-term recovery group effort, that will apply for that funding, right? Will help impacted community members apply for that funding to support their recovery. Best practices for long-term recovery group, and you can just stay on that slide, I think, for now. So some of the best practices is the organizational structure of a long-term recovery group. You want to have established strong, experienced leadership to guide the long-term recovery group. In Santa Cruz County, we were extremely fortunate to have Valerie Brown come in as a contracted partner through United Policyholders and help start up our long-term recovery group. We did not have a VOAD, we did not have a long-term recovery group, and so without that outside support to create that structure and literally tell us how do we do this, right? We had 911 homes burned down. How do we start? And so that's really really important, and Valerie was instrumental in explaining to us and training us on how to set it up. It's important to implement a robust communication system to keep all stakeholders informed. In the beginning, same with the VOAD, with when a disaster hits, you want to have very frequent meetings. So same with the long-term recovery group, you'll meet frequently. You'll make sure that all the stakeholders, everybody involved, have the information that they need to be effective, and that information also goes out into the community. So you can see I added sort of arrows in both directions as part of my bubbles, because there's always going to be information coming in that needs to come into each of those categories, and then that is discussed in meetings with steering committee and then gets translated and sent out to other committees that is then tasked with actually doing something about it. So, for example, if there is, there's volunteer coordination happening, right? But we need to have volunteers. That would be the communication committee, for example, that could send out then communication to the communities to make sure that we have the volunteers that we need to do specific tasks. Case management, and I know we have a great speaker next who's going to talk about case management, so I'll touch upon it very briefly. Just a few things I want to touch on is the assessment. The more thorough you can do that, make that assessment as you meet the clients the first time, the less times you have to ask the same questions. And for anyone who's been through a disaster, who's talking to FEMA, is talking to SBA, is talking to Small Business Administration, is then talking to somebody doing damage assessment, is talking to the disaster intake center, and then is talking to disaster case manager. Honestly, they've told their stories so many times and it's exhausting. It's painful, right? And so we want to avoid that as much as possible. And that's somewhere also that long-term recovery groups can come in, especially if you're set up ahead of time to create sort of a unified model that we all use. So if you're going door to door out into the community, talking to constituents that have been impacted, you want to have a central way of collecting that information that is then shared across the organizations that are part of the recovery effort. Community engagement, involve community members in your group. So in our board has, well, I'm not on the board, I'm not the executive director, I was personally impacted. We had 2 other board members that were personally impacted. So that's 2 out of 6. So a pretty high, it's a pretty high percentage there. We have disaster case management on our board. So you want to make sure that you have the voices on those committees, on the board that actually knows what's going on the ground. We don't want to create helicopter models where we come in and say, we know how to fix this, right? You want to ask, what is it that is happening in your community and how can we support you, and then see how we can connect everybody in our community, in our recovery process, that have resources that can meet that need. I'm trying to rush through a little bit because I know there's a lot of other speakers here. So financial management, you want to make sure that you have a way of collecting that funding. Again, community foundations, huge plug for that. We've been so fortunate to have a strong community foundation in Santa Cruz County, and also a church community, Valley Churches United. So those are sort of 2 organizations in Santa Cruz County who's done donation management, have funneled funding to them, and are still, after 4 years after the CCU fire, are still have funding available, and are still funding cases up to $50,000 for recovery efforts. Let's see. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm a little annoyed by this model. I think it's great in many ways, but the reason I'm a little annoyed with it is because it says up to 1 year, and then it's like after anniversary, and then it stops, right? We're not 4 years after the CCU fire, and this repeats itself often. It is, it shows the emotional toll of a disaster, but it doesn't end there. It keeps going, and especially 4 years later, we have hundreds of homes that haven't been rebuilt yet, and so it's just something for us to keep in mind as we work with families, we work in long-term recovery groups, or in other ways are working with families impacted, that we're in for the long haul. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And, it's okay to take breaks and say, I need to step back from this for a little bit because I've put myself in it so much that I need to take care of myself. That's very, very important. But we do need to know that it's a long haul. We're in it, until it's done, so to speak. Let's see. So, straddling both, so you can go to the next slide, please. So So straddling both sides of the fence when it comes to disaster recovery, because I work in disaster recovery and I'm also impacted by the disaster. I understand how important it is to be connected to the challenges that our community members face, right? And so by building strong relationships with our community, with our impacted community, we're better able to advocate for them, we're better able to understand what their needs are. And let's see, we can also empower community members to rebuild their lives and, you know, be sort of an active part of that recovery process. We can, oh, this is Santa Cruz. I forgot the slide. So this is what happened. So we had two disasters. We had the 2020 fires. We lost 911 homes across around 680 properties, more or less. And as of last week, we had 122 complete rebuilds, final occupancy permits. So you can see there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So upwards of 200 properties have been sold so far. So some decided not to rebuild. We have quite a few, over 100 that are, so it's called CNC, conditionally not cleared. It means that they have difficulty clearing the path for actually being allowed to rebuild. We have multiple difficulties in Santa Cruz. We have geological issues. We have environmental health with septic systems. We live on a fault line. We also have entire communities that are not able to rebuild because CAL FIRE will not sign off on their roads. So there's sort of multiple challenges. You can go to the next slide. Probably just click through 2 slides. You can go to the next one too. So one of the things that we learned when the atmospheric rivers happened in 2023 is that disasters look very different depending on the type of disaster. So we thought we knew disaster after a wildfire, and then we had an atmospheric river, and the response, the needed response was immediate, right? And so with a wildfire, after it burns, we have to wait for debris removal. It can take months. Our home burned down in August, and we were not cleared to do anything on our property really until March the next year. So that's how long it can take to clear a property after a wildfire. Whereas with the flooding in the atmospheric rivers, it was imperative to get out there immediately and start doing, mediation work, mucking guts, and avoid, future mold programs. So at that point, I think one of the biggest challenges that we faced was warehouse space and having room to house volunteers to come and help with the work. What else? I'm gonna run out of time, so I'm gonna be, let's see. I think just to leave you with something, every community is different. We have the North County fires was up in the mountains. I sometimes say we have 2 hard-to-reach communities in Santa Cruz County. We have the mountain community, which are insular in many ways. Many do not want to apply for resources. It's a little bit of a, I can do this on my own sentiments. And then you have our South County community, where we have a much larger Latinx population who are sometimes fearful of going to centers and applying for resources that they qualify for, that they are eligible for. So I want to close with the importance of long-term recovery groups to understand the communities that they work with, tailor their response accordingly, to make sure that they are able to, effectively reach people and share information about the resources available. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to throw some more money on the table. So when you have a FEMA IA declaration, you need to, when you're standing up that long-term recovery group or when your VOAD is going, you need a multi-agency ROI. I'm not going to define the terms yet, so put my money on the table. And that the reason you do that is if you have that, regardless of whether you have the FEMA IA, individual assistance, or you don't, and you when you get to case management, whether it is DCMP, and I'll let James explain that. That's why my third dollar's going on the table. Or you're handling it yourselves with the resources you have, volunteer or paid. You need to know who those people are that were impacted, and so that's one of the takeaways when you're standing up that long-term recovery group. You need to have that piece. If you don't have that piece, it is important you get it. You are welcome to come to the LTRG. I'll throw another dollar in, Kevin. Sorry. Group. We meet monthly. I don't remember what Friday, but I know we meet on Fridays. And I'd like to introduce James, and he can define that word I did not define. Yes. James Coble with Catholic Charities of Coble County.
Before I actually start, I want to recognize some of our program providers who actually do DCMP work. Well, there's my first dollar. So we have East Bay, we have San Francisco, we have Santa Cruz, Monterey, we have Santa Clara. And Valerie, if you could change hats for just 1 second, we have San Diego. I know it's been a long day, so if you need to stand up during my presentation and stretch a little bit, you're more than welcome to. No offense up here. So I had this wonderful, fantastic presentation of which 90% was covered today. So what I think I'm going to do is talk about the nuances of DCMP work. Valerie hit me with some questions, so I'm going to kind of cover some of those things as well. The first thing I want to say is what vision Kevin and Adriana and your group has. Education is the fifth component of those 4 C's, although it's not a C word, right? But education is so important to understand the roles that each one of us take within this whole process. And I want you to know that DCMP work, I told you, Zach, that stop to the ATM was working. So it's evolving. Annie and I were talking about the fires back in 2020, and one more thing. FEMA FIDO report. When we started, so I was a program manager for the Creek Fire in Fresno County and the SQF fire in Tulare County. Our report, our damage assessment report included a name, a phone number, maybe or maybe not an email address. So FEMA and California Department of Social Services, who we contract with as the management agency, asked for more information. So as of the last 2 declarations, not only did we get a name and a phone number, contact information, we have actual damage assessments done by FEMA, so we know the numerical value of that. We know what FEMA paid them. And I'm going to talk about some of our positions within DCMP work, so it's late in the day, you guys, I'm sorry. You're going to get rich, Zach. We're going to fund the next disaster through my mistakes here. But having this information gives our case managers the ability to triage, which is very important. There is only so much money that we can distribute, right? And it is these VOADs and long-term recovery groups, I didn't say LTRG. It's these long-term recovery groups that actually provide a lot of the financial or resources that we don't have. So let me clarify something about IA, individual assistance.
Oh, wait, you find it.
Thank you. So most people think when they hear an award, for example, let's just say East Bay, you were awarded $3 million in your county. So she's probably thinking, gosh, I have $3 million, where are you going to make an impact? The funds are restricted. So those restricted funds are, it will pay for fringe benefits, salaries, it will pay for office space. And there's some language, and I hope Renee Jackson's left because I don't remember the proper language. But it's very important. We don't call it materials or supplies. There's language that FEMA is very much aware, CDS is very much aware, but we can work around as a line item to get those things done. But it's very restrictive. So there's another bucket of money that goes directly to the survivors. And I know that Kevin talked earlier about duplication of services. And I know initially there are a lot of good-hearted people doing a lot of great work, I want to preface this, it needs to be done at the time of the disaster. And I'll talk about timelines in just a second. Has to be done, but we don't want to duplicate anything because those poor folks may have to pay FEMA back any funds that were given. So to be able to vet is one of the main things that our disaster case managers do. They will vet, they'll see what was distributed, and we itemize that. So when FEMA says, when we're doing an appeals letter, and I'll talk about appeals in just 1 second, where did that money go? We can itemize it, we can do it, so there's no duplication of services. So let me talk about the timeline for just 1 second. Back in the 2020 wildfires, I didn't get a FEMA FIDO for 8 months. We didn't know who we had to contact, so we relied on United Way, the Red Cross, church organizations, and whoever was doing that work initially to get us started. And so when I say to get us started, I want you to know there's only been one, change your hat again. San Diego County had the funds to start off on day one. Everybody else is waiting to be funded through FEMA. So we've learned a lot during this process because FEMA generally doesn't get your providers the money funded for 6 months. So people have to operate for 6 months without FEMA reimbursement. It actually goes through CDSS. California Department of Social Services. I'm gonna get this right, guys.
Just give her your wallet.
Thank you. The PIN number is. And I lost my train of thought, but kind of going back to the process.
California Department of Social Services.
That didn't help me. Thank you. Bless you.
Funding of the disaster case manager.
Thanks, Annie. So it takes care of funding of case managers. Typically what happens is when FEMA does a damage assessment, it's undervalued. We know with the fires, pretty easy to assess damage, right? There's a foundation, no walls, everything's just burnt. With our floods, you may not even know that a house is damaged. You may not even see water marks on the side of the house, although the water level might have been 5-6 feet deep. Not until you go inside the house. So when you go inside the house, you'll see electrical issues, you'll see mold, you'll see just a number of different things. And I think Zach, you said the new dollar cap is $43,000. Well, for some of our floods, it was $41,000. So can you imagine owning a home where you had a mudslide, pushed it off its foundation, and the most you could hope for is $41,000? Just doesn't cut it. Some of our rural areas that need the barriers from the house. Help me out, Kevin. What are those called? Thank you. See, you guys are experts already. I don't know what I'm doing. That can cost $200,000. We've seen $200,000 walls that need to be replaced, and the $41,000, since it's not the home, it doesn't cover that. It'll only cover the structure, and of course you have to own the home to get that reimbursed, right? So what our folks have done, so that just the 5 programs that I talked about did appeal letters to FEMA, and those survivors were awarded over $500,000 in excess of what they paid on initially. Can you imagine that? So raise your hand, providers. Just amazing work. And to navigate the FEMA process, I think I heard somebody say, if you check the wrong box on the application process, it goes into Never Never Land. You'll never hear it. And I really appreciate the gentleman who said that it's not really a denial, it's we need more information. I wish we could communicate that a little bit better. So one of the lessons that we've learned is we need to do a better job of educating people. So our FEMA representative in Catholic Charities California, one of the lessons we learned, we have to train. We have to train our providers better. And through this, we have to train local government better to understand what our limitations are as case managers. So we've been to places where they said, oh great, you're gonna go talk to all of our homeless. You know, we're not subcontractors with counties. We have a specific role. And I can say, like in the areas of Pajaro and Planada, where the state awarded an additional $20 million, 10 for public assistance and 10 for individual assistance. What a difference that made, having an extra $10 million to distribute. Just amazing. I wish they could do it throughout the state and throughout the country, actually. But it's through this DCM process that we triage. We can only help a limited number of folks with the monies that we have. As you can imagine, everybody who's been through some of this has experienced some level of trauma. So part of your long-term recovery group, part of your VOAD, hopefully you have a mental health partner that we can figure out how we can help people who are having emotional difficulties through this time. And you know, one of the things that we found, as for the January and March events, when people start seeing rain, it triggers. A lot of our people have PTSD. There's another one. Post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Disorder.
So thank you. Thank you. Put in an extra buck for that. But you can imagine how traumatic these events are. We have to deal with the whole person, right? We heard some beautiful music. We heard things to calm our souls. We have to be able to provide that same kind of services to our survivors. Children, they see this. You're going to see a lot of behavioral issues. They can't necessarily express through words, but it's through behavior, right? So we'll see a lot of acting out. We'll see a lot of sleepless nights. We'll see changes in routines. So again, our disaster case managers, although they're not licensed clinicians, certainly are paraprofessionals in social work. So if it's beyond their scope of ability, they will certainly refer that out to licensed providers. But they are certainly an ear for survivors to hear what's going on with their lives. And one of the processes that we have is we have a matrix system. So we take a lot of things and we add it up because we want to help those who are most needy. So we do have a process to vet, to make sure that they were actually involved at that event, but what the needs are. So when we look at a long-term recovery group of VOAD, and we present cases to your group to ask for support, we vetted them. You can be rest assured that who you are getting is the people that we have ranked as the most needy. So a case will be presented to you with a lot of detailed information, damages, and what they're asking for. So whether it's materials, whether it is finances, whatever the case may be, it will be presented to this group, and you as a body will decide whether or not you're going to grant the unmet needs or not. So it's really a partnership with our case management system and with you all. And you know, we found that programs that have an existing long-term recovery group or VOAD, much more successful. You see a lot more people being discharged because they reached their success than those counties that do not have that option. I mean, it's just night and day. What else can I say about all this process? That's it. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you. So this FEMA added $5 list depends on what county you're in. We've seen them as low as 1,500. And Valerie, I think you're at 8,000 in San Diego County. 8,900 plus people signed up for FEMA services. That doesn't include all the people who say, I don't want to deal with Catholic Charities, Although it's not a Catholic Charities thing. We are just the management agency, or I don't want to work with government. We have places in rural areas that they live in rural areas because they don't want to deal with local governments. So one of the things that we do is we geomap. Wherever we find someone who has been affected, who has signed up for FEMA, we will go to the neighbors and say, do you need help? So we're reaching far more than the 8,900 plus people that have been involved. And Kevin, can you keep me honest? I haven't been keeping track of my time, so when I get close to... You got it. Thank you. Thank you. Keep going. Keep it going.
Yeah, $3 in the pot that we have not got.
Okay, I'm at $21 now.
You're welcome, Zach. You're welcome, Zach. Okay, 2 minutes. Thank you very much. So, in closing, I just want to say that not only do they vet survivors, but we vet vendors. You would be amazing how many construction firms ask for things that they can't deliver, right? So legally in California, we can get 10% or $1,000 to start a project. Some of these, I'll call them shady contractors, are asking for 50% or more up front, and then you never see them again. So again, we have a cost construction analyst as part of our case management team, and what they do is they kind of educate our folks. We have resource coordinators who look for various resources. We even have an access and functional needs specialist for community, for when we see, because on that FEMA, FIDO list, they have a whole section of folks who have those functional needs. They describe what they are, so we can look for those resources at the same time. It's very inclusive. I have 1 minute, so you know what? I'm gonna leave with this. I just appreciate the fact that you're all at the table today, because we really need to know what our roles are. If you have any questions about case management, we have 4 tables that have content experts. Please bend their ear and ask them what they're doing, because they're doing some amazing work out there. Thank you very much, everybody. Oh, just one thing in closing. I want to just talk about the timeline for the individual assistance. So this award is good for 24 months. When we can show need, we can extend it for another 12 months for a total of 36 months. Recovery takes years and years and years. There's still people in paradise still trying to recover. So the long-term recovery group, VOADs, you need to be there 5, 10, you need to be there long after disaster case management program is done. So just want to leave you with that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, we're up to $22 and counting. Where is this money going? There's a piggy bank here. I assume we're doing that. All right. So, and to not to be funny about the piggy bank, but to piggyback off what James said, just to set expectations to get your community recovered might take 10, 15, 20 years. I know San Diego, we're still sitting on somebody's funds from an unmet needs table from 2003 because she's handling her recovery. We have dollars earmarked for something, and we're waiting for her to need that last little bit of money. It's 21 years later, and she is not home, but she's so close. So speaking of that, of giving hope and what James was saying about just pulling it all together, we're going to talk about spiritual and emotional care. With us today is Kendrick Neal. He's the director of California Southern Baptist Disaster Relief. And I will put you up here. I know Kendrick wearing another hat, not to be funny, we all have hats. He did our training remember I said we had the video for the muck outs in English and Spanish, so Kendrick was our person who trained everybody who was volunteering in San Diego and also did our recording.
Good afternoon. Like many of you, I'm watching the clock, so we will help this go. But we've been talking about long-term recovery and definitions and acronyms, and if that's not confusing enough, we're going to throw the word spiritual care in front of all that stuff. And everybody, when we hear spiritual care, we have 1,000 different things that we think of. So just to help us get on the same page, I just want to give you VOAD's description and VOAD's definition of spiritual care. But even though when we say spiritual, it is so complex and there's so many complexities to that, there are some common things that run through spiritual care. Things like meaning of life, things like hope and the human spirit, what happens. And so those are common themes when we talk about spiritual. And while each person's spiritual life is unique, we still have similar trends that run through our spiritual life. Sense of community, sense of personal mission, sense of well-being and joy. And so following a disaster, we can see that many of those trends are torn apart, are ripped apart, and they need to be nurtured and they need to be attended to. I just want to read a quote from a past president of the National VOAD, and he said this. He said, "A disaster affects the entire fabric of community that existed prior to the event and can cause traumatic stress among the whole community. Disaster recovery is in large part the rebuilding of community, the retying of thousands of strands of relationship in the fabric of our beings together that have been severed by the disaster." So when we talk about spiritual care, we're including anything that insists the individual, the family, or the community drawing upon their own spiritual perspectives as a source of strength, hope, and healing after the disaster. In disaster relief, long-term recovery is anything that nourishes the human spirit in coping with the crisis. That is spiritual care. And that is what we are talking about when I talk about spiritual care today. Almost every national recognized faith is a part of the VOAD. And as Valerie mentioned earlier, it might not be in your VOAD. It might be in the VOAD next to you. And if you can't find it in the VOAD next to you, you can call National VOAD. And they will have a tremendous amount of resources available to you for each faith practice. So I want to make sure that that's clear, that when you look around your table, when you're at your VOAD, and if you can't find the faith practice that you need, go higher. Call the state or call national, and they will have a tremendous amount of resources for you. So I just want to cover a few things about how spiritual care ties into long-term recovery. There's a few things. Basically, I want to give you two ways that it ties into it, and I want to give you two warnings or two things to watch out for. The first thing is that spiritual care in long-term recovery, this is that old saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so connecting with your VOAD, connecting with your spiritual care providers of your VOAD, and putting things in place for the disaster, for planning and preparedness and training and mitigation, and working through houses of worship and places of faith to be able to connect with your people, and designing plans through the house of worship. So many times we just think that the houses of worship, we think of faith practices as something that gets in the way, but really they have a very unique connection to that community. And really what happens is when you come in after the disaster, VOAD spiritual care providers, they don't come in and replace the community spiritual care providers that are already in place. They have to work alongside them. So it's good as a VOAD to make connections with those places of worship, with those houses of worship, with those faith practices in your community before the disaster happens. So that's the one thing I really want to impart on you, is try to make those connections beforehand. Try to make those connections early so you can help do the planning and the preparing and the mitigation. As we've talked about so many times before, when disaster strikes, that's not the time to build relationships. That's not the time to meet people. And your houses of worship and your faith practices, they're in your communities. They're connected to your communities, and you want to build those relationships early. So that was the first thing I want to touch about. The second thing is that during the disaster, don't neglect the communication piece that your spiritual care providers have, as they are tied to parts of the community, so ingrained in those communities. Just recently, we had a fire, and people were calling me from the churches, and pastors were calling me saying, "Hey, what is going on with this?" And they weren't getting the information through their community or through their VOAD, and houses of worship and faith practices and spiritual care providers are one of those agencies that you could use to distribute information during the disaster. So when you're connected to VOAD and you have your partners, don't neglect the ability that they have to pass information for you during and after that disaster. There's two last things. I wanted to leave you also with a warning. So the first thing I want to tell you about is do the pre-planning. Connect with your faith practices. Connect with the people who do spiritual care in your community. The second part was the communication. Don't neglect that during or after the disaster. Now, some warnings. Spiritual care providers through VOAD, they are typically not clinical therapists. And so as a VOAD, you need to be careful with that and watch with people that are providing spiritual care. What are they able to do and what can't they do? We are more like triage, and so spiritual care providers come in there and we reference people to clinical. We do long-term relationships, but we are not those clinical providers. So when you're talking with your spiritual care providers, make sure you know what that is. And then the last thing that I just want to touch about, especially in long-term recovery, is don't forget about the spiritual and emotional care of your people. So many times that is something that VOADs do, is we are so focused on the survivors that we forget about our own people. And so I just want you to make sure that that is something you plan for your VOADs, that is something you plan for your organizations, that you connect with those people. And you keep an eye on your people, and you are protecting your people. In long-term recovery for my organization, that is something that we do. Every team that goes out has a person on that team who is monitoring the spiritual and emotional well-being of each person on that team. And so that is just something I just want to make sure you're doing as leaders in your communities and of your teams. That's all.
All right, and there should be a book for everyone on the table. And just to, I'm looking at the piggy bank, which is why I keep saying piggyback, on what Kendrick said. Think about with your VOAD, how you would operate during peacetime and then replicate some of that. So if you have a once a quarter, you're getting together and having a meeting, make it where you break bread with people. My long-term recovery group, my DCMP, and the team that's working with people day in, day out, we do a monthly meal. We have a lunch. We skipped one in September, but we're back on track. But the idea is that, we need to create a safe space for us to take care of ourselves.
Stop the video, please.
Yes, I don't even have the thing, the clicker. Stop his video, yes, please. Sorry. Yes, I can't speak to construction, thank you. But thinking about that, the disaster case management program, James has baked in trauma-informed care practices and the work that they do in the training, but also support resources for those disaster case managers so that we have those tools to take care of ourselves, because it's a long ride. I think Tonje said it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so pacing yourself is key. And then speaking of pacing, I'm going to turn this over to Kevin Cox, the founder and CEO of Hope Crisis Response Network, to talk about rebuilding.
Thank you, Valerie. The reason why I needed him to stop the video is because I actually cheated. What I did was I figured you'd all be tired of seeing slides all day. So I'm actually going to show you a video of start to finish from the impact all the way to rebuilding a home. And the good news, it's timed. So you all, when the video stops, yell stop. And that takes care of so I don't go over my time. So let's go ahead and start the video. So again, as you mentioned, I'm Kevin Cox. I'm with Hope Crisis Response Network. Not like you haven't seen me a lot already today. And I'm sorry about that. But we are experts, subject matter experts in housing, in building. One of the things everyone thinks that, it's so easy to come in and rebuild a home. But did you know that there's only 2 disaster relief organizations that are actually allowed to build in California, excluding Habitat for Humanity because they work in their own county? Hope Crisis Response Network and Mennonite Disaster Service. We are the only 2 from disaster response because we provide free services. And when we bring in volunteers from all over North America, and I want you to know that my presentation, it includes Mennonite Disaster Service. I did not say MDS. I said Mennonite Disaster Service.
I have all these ones here, and no piggyback to put in.
Yeah. So because our organizations are kind of built off each other, but for over 25 years, we used to serve nationally in scope. But when we came into California in 2015, we found that there were not a lot of services that provided the type of work that we do. We've been very blessed to have a lot of knowledge and just know disaster response inside out. I think my wife called me a prodigy of disasters. She also said if I'm home too long, she always says, "Hey, don't you have a disaster to go to?" So I have to make sure. She doesn't say that very often, but especially since this past year. And that's why I love following Kendrick, because hope is so important. And in our name, we use the word hope. And we call our rebuild programs Hope City. And the reason why we do that is because we bring volunteers from all over North America. Mennonite Disaster Service does the same thing. And their volunteers are mostly come from the Amish Mennonite background. Excellent builders. But you know what? Our builders are pretty good too. The unique thing of why we call Hope City is because when we come into a community to start building, it gets really confusing when you have all these different names out there. They'll see somebody building a house and they'll say, oh, I'm with the First United Methodist, or I'm with such and such. So what we decided to do is to drop our name, Hope Crisis Response Network, and call it Hope City, because we're bringing hope to the families that we are blessed to be able to help build. Now, you need to understand that we don't build for the families directly. We build for the long-term recovery group. And so our direction is that we take their direction. And so I want you to notice the sequence here. You've got long-term recovery, which coordinates and brings in the clients. You've got case management that comes along and does the cases. And by the way, the unsung heroes of a disaster response are the case managers. They are the ones that do the work. They're the ones that do the work, and we cannot do ours without them. And so as we're progressing, we get into emotional and spiritual care, because now, as Tonje pointed out, sometimes it takes a long time. I think Valerie might have said that. It takes a while. We just finished 6.5 years, or six years in Paradise, finishing up. And you start to see that people losing hope, losing that, that glow in their eye becomes really disappointing. And so we need to have that emotional, spiritual care as we're building. And that's the beauty about how, as an organization, ourselves and Mennonite Disaster Service is that we're very relational. I don't know if you could figure that out about me today, but we are very, very much into taking care of families, but also having a good listening ear. And that's the important thing in our rebuilds, is that we get to identify additional needs as we're building a home for a family. And so if we hear that, they lost their van and they needed the wheelchair lift, or they needed something else that was needed, but it was never reported to the case manager, we can report it back to the case manager to help. So that's why we really focus on the intentionally listening. And sometimes we all do a lot more talking than we should, and we're not doing enough listening. And as we listen, we can pick up those things. So as we move forward, working through the long-term recovery group, and then working through case management, once we get the go, we get to start building a house. Now keep in mind, we get to build the house, but for most of us and our VOAD partners, we're there to see lives restored. And it's important that we do both equally. I tell our volunteers when they come in, we get to build, but we're commanded to restore the lives. And so as we're putting together the sticks and all the things that are needed to build a home, we include the homeowner along the way. We want them to be a part of the rebuild. We don't require sweat equity, because most of the families that we serve are already in an overstressed situation. They're already in a problematic situation in their lives that we don't want to put undue stress. But if we can put a broom in their hand at the end of the day and they help sweep out, all the sawdust, pretty soon the next day you see them come along and they're there and they're ready to sweep things out. They're ready to start. So we're helping them to get reacclimated back into a new normalcy into their life at the same time as we're doing the building. Everybody just thinks, again, it's so easy to just go build a house, but you don't understand the problems that we face. No county in the state of California does it the same way. When we go to have to do a building permit, we have to go and learn from the building department, what are the requirements, what are the things. When we build along the way, the inspections, all the things that need to happen there. The inspections, we know if we're doing a flooded home, we got to go in, determine when do we need a structural engineer. A lot of the other problems that we face, especially in San Diego right now, is we have, in this Pajaro, we had this problem too. We had a lot of unpermitted structures. So we could not begin the the repair process until we brought that house up to code. And that meant following up on having to pay the fines for the unpermitted structure that was added to the house. So there's a lot of things that we look at. The other thing is we don't want to build a home for the bank. So we make sure that, through our case management process, we want to make sure that either they owe less than $20,000 or they own the home themselves. They must be current on their property taxes, on their state and federal taxes, because the last thing we want is for the government to come in and seize a home that was built with donated dollars and donated labor. So we have to take a lot of these things in the mind of how to successfully not only help an LTRG, a long-term recovery group. I got another dollar in my wallet. We want to make sure that we're operating to make sure that they're succeeding, but also at the same time, working with our case management, they know our process and they can ensure that it has been well vetted and everything is to what it is. We do work in a lot of communities, unfortunately, where we have to do a lot of the vetting over because there are times where someone might have been really close or a family member that lost the structure and they were doing their own case management for their family. Kind of not cool. And so we had to make sure that we went back and redid that vetting process. We've had conversation with my buddy James about this, and by the way, it was not Catholic Charities, just so you know. Catholic Charities has done a phenomenal job in the case management process. But as we're taking the cues from them, that we work with the construction analyst. And the construction analyst from Catholic Charities helps in two different ways. Not only are they a good go-between us and the case managers themselves, but they also, if it's not a full rebuild, the construction analyst jumps in and they help to identify, how to do a repair or how to do such and such, that can be paid for and is not a part of the rebuild. Now, in floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, those are all challenging because, again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't know if you need a structural engineer to determine. Water does a lot of damage and moves a lot of homes off the foundation. So we have to make sure that we do everything right. We do it correct. We're not going to come in and do shoddy workmanship. We're not going to come in and bypass the system. What we are going to do is make sure that we bring in a structural engineer to determine what's correct. When we first started building homes in California in 2015-16, our 3-bedroom, 2-bath cost $73,000. Today, because of the requirements of the California Licensing Contractors Board, our home now costs us $210,000. That's a lot of money. And for example, the Park Fire right now, they don't even have enough money to build one full house, and that's a challenge that we run into. We have to make sure we lost exemption on solar, so now we have to include solar on all the homes that we build. But the beauty of it is the workmanship is top notch. We make sure we build a beautiful home. We always give instruction to the volunteers. Think of yourself living in this house. We want to make sure that it's a house built with love, a house built with hope. And we had one of our clients, how am I doing? I'm good. I haven't missed out yet. We had a client in Henryville, Indiana, and she said to me that, Mike, the video will stop at the right time, so we're good. So she said to me one time, we do what's called family night. On Thursday nights, we invite the families that we serve to have dinner with the volunteers. We get, again, building the relationship. And she said to me one day, and this is a really non-believing person, and she didn't like church people, but we built her house because it was in need. We don't discriminate on anything. And we got to become very close. And one day she came to our family dinner, and we had completed her house, and she said, can I speak tonight? I said, sure, absolutely. And so when it came time to share, she got up and she said, I want you to know that I used to have an old home, and it wasn't really safe for us to live in, but it's all I had, and it was difficult for us because we had rats, we had mice, we had all these different things. But you came in and you built us a house. You gave us everything we needed to be successful in our recovery. But then she went on to say this, and this is what got me the most. She said, every night when I lay in bed, and we're talking about living in Tornado Alley, and the rain falls heavy, she said to me and the group that when she lays in bed, and I should preface this by telling you, we have our volunteers sign the 2x4s and the trusses in the home. She says, I have 200 angels that oversee me every night when I go to bed. And she thinks about every volunteer that came in. She thinks about every signature that's up there. And she felt the love of what we get to do in the VOAD. And I think that's one of the things that's missed quite frequently is the fact that we love unconditionally. We don't judge. We all work together, and it takes a village to build a home. So I'm at my time. You didn't yell stop. You didn't yell stop.
Thank you for not letting him get to the finish of his story. Thank you. Yeah, we saw it, but it would have interrupted the flow. So I've got a couple of questions that were posed by several of you when you registered online. I'm going to run through those. And then Mike, you have a mic in case we have questions. So I'm going to hit with 3, and then if we have time, if Mike says we have time, we'll take more. So for each of our presenters, if you can share 2 things with the group. Who are the typical partners in your specific work? And what would be either a pitfall that you would recommend to the group to avoid, or a lesson you learned that you want to share? And Kevin, you've got the mic. If you'll just, we'll start with Tonje. No pressure, Tonje.
Is it on? Yes. So 2 partners are county government. We would not be able to do it without them, especially now that we're doing, throughout the cycle, but we're doing volunteer rebuild work right now. And so we are constantly communicating with the planning department and OR3 about the work that we do. Yes, so that's one. And the other one is the disaster case management organizations. We could not do the work that we do if it wasn't for their work and vetting and supporting the clients that we work for. Pitfalls in my work, long-term recovery, I think something that we could have been better at early is creating clear parameters for funding allocations for disaster case managers. It's something that has been challenging to know exactly when to say yes and when to say no. And then what was the last one? Successes?
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. Oh gosh, so many. I think the biggest lesson is to keep a structure in place for future disasters, to not let this go away, what we have learned, because we saw that during the atmospheric rivers, that having a long-term recovery group structure in place helped us sort of kick into gear really quickly and do what needed to be done.
I would say government as well. I mean, the permitting process for each county is different, as Kevin had pointed out, and you can move mountains in a short period of time if you have the cooperation and the same vision. And then long-term recovery groups, VOADs, you guys are key in making sure that they get the resources that they need. Pitfalls, and I think Renee Jackson kind of alluded to this. I wish we had providers in each county starting day one. That would begin the entire process a whole lot earlier. And unfortunately, we just can't find everybody just yet. And I'm sorry, the last one was?
Lesson learned.
My gosh, that we're not stagnant. We're learning every day. We're implementing everything that we've learned and putting it into a curriculum and into practice for best practices. So with each new disaster, we're able to share that with our new providers and existing providers. So thank all of you for that.
So when we talk about partners, and there's just so many names. So I would just say national faith practices and organizations across the nation. There's so many, but then the other one is local faith churches and houses of worship. Just such a unique relationship with the community, and we often forget that. And so those would be the two partners: national faith organizations and local churches. As far as the things we
Pitfalls to avoid.
pitfalls. I actually got to share those with you, right? And those were some of the things I talked about, is just neglecting the communication aspect that our houses of worship have in those communities and those relationships, and sidelining those because we're looking at a checklist and we're not using those community relationships that we have within our own VOAD. We're not fully using those, and so that's a pitfall. A lesson learned is taking care of our people. We see it all the time, and I can tell you there's been times when I've sent teams out, and I didn't have a chaplain or I didn't have a spiritual care provider, but I just wanted to do something so quick, and most of the time I paid for that. And not having somebody intentionally taking care of our teams that are in those disaster relief scenarios.
I think for the building, your two major partners that you look at is one, the long-term recovery group, and that includes your liaisons to Cal OES and to FEMA, and having all of those pieces that come together that help further the build. The other component is the local building department. Local building departments, as I mentioned to you earlier, is that no two counties do it the same way. So you want to make sure that you're building to their codes. Even though we have blueprints and they come across the way to the county, the challenge you have is there's no two inspectors that are the same. So one inspector might come in and say that, oh, you did this wrong and you got to redo it. So you got to have that good relationship with the building department. And then my pitfall, I would have to say, is get everything in writing when you're working with your local building departments. We've had times where they'll say, oh, just go ahead and do it that way and you're good. And then you'll say, can I have that in writing? Because the next inspector's going to tell me to redo it because I do that. And so you'll find that many of them won't put anything in writing to you, and you end up having to be at the mercy of the different building inspectors that come in. So those are my successes and my pitfalls.
All right, thank you for that. Piggybacking off of Kendrick's, the pitfall about communication. So I'm old. My fire was 2007, and I did what he said. I actually went to all my faith partners and all my impacted zip codes, and I gave them my communications for survivors and for partner agencies so they could put it in their bulletin. So whatever day they met, that got out to people. That was just part of what we did because we needed to cast a wide net and catch people wherever they were. Mike, we've got less than 5 minutes. If you have a question for the group, if you'll raise your hand, Mike or I will bring a microphone to you. You just have to call out who your question is for. Oh no, not Dave Reed.
I know the answer to this, but I wanted to share. What is the best and how often should we communicate the journey of recovery to our victims or our survivors? And how long should we repeat that story of how to recover?
About 10 more times than when you thought you were done, right? And that's just something that you can never do enough of. And so oftentimes I hear, oh, we put that out last week. Well, half people didn't get it. So I would say, when you think you're done, do it 10 more times.
And that goes to that no wrong door approach, right? You want everybody communicating. Time.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, also create multiple ways of communicating with people. So some people are going to read a text message, some people are going to read the postcard that arrives in their mail, but a lot of people aren't. And so you need to also create community forums and gathering spaces where people will come out to get other vital information for their recovery, and then be there and share the information that you think that they need.
you know, in terms of case management, we have a tier system, so we may schedule meetings once a week or more often depending on the need. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 being the weekly, and then bi-weekly. In terms of one of the unique things that happened in Fresno, they didn't call it a trauma group meeting, they called it coffee and cookies. So everybody felt more comfortable attending that little group, and they invariably shared their shared experience, which was invaluable. So I would say do that at least every other week if you could, or every month.
Next question.
Hi, it's actually a follow-up. My name is Andrea Estrada, and I was hired in February for the Pajaro Recovery Projects. I'm all Pajaro, and I wanted to follow up with your question. Last week, I went to the Pajaro Food Center, and I saw a little girl wearing a pet backpack, meaning like it's clear and you can see like a cat or whatever pet you want. And I asked this little girl, why do you have the 2 little birds in the backpack? And she said, last year, my birds drowned at the Pajaro flooding. So she said, I'm scared that's going to happen again. So it still continues. And since I have everybody's attention, I want to thank Aretha from Catholic Charities, Cornelia Bridges, Patricia, and Anna. We've been working with these residents for months, and so it's hard. It's still very hard. People are still scared and angry and frustrated, and we just do our best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great comment. I had the pleasure of spending 9 months in Pajaro and coordinating a lot of the cleanup effort. And one of the things that working in a migrant community, we found a lot of challenges. But what a resilient community, the love and respect that they show to one another, their homes, their families. And we have to remember, and this is more in the response than it is in the rebuild, is that I noticed that families would come up, and every day the same family would come and ask for a bottle of bleach. And you thought to yourself, well, should I give it to them? What are they doing with all this bleach? And then I realized something is that a lot of these families don't know where that next resource is coming from. So they gather, they kind of nest, and they have these things because they don't know what tomorrow holds, and they don't know where that's going to come from. And so I want to remind you all, when you're in the response phase or you're moving through the recovery, be generous to those families because they really do need that assistance.
And pay attention to cultural competency, knowing the communities you're serving, and because there are things you might not know.
Hi, I'm Cole Cameron, a senior cert instructor, which is Community Emergency Response Team, a FEMA program of Neighbors Helping Neighbors. Been really happy to take off from Marsh's $20 list and the 20 languages. We're serving the community with cert in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese Mandarin. So that's just a resource for everyone in the preparation phase. One of my questions as an old systems guy is, I know about Vision Link being around Marcia and our cadre team, and I know there's other systems in Red Cross, Catholic Charities, maybe the Small Business Administration, the State Operations Center, or perhaps even FEMA. Is there any collaboration sitting down with those so we have one system with everything in it?
Well, that's why we created the Vision Link, and the folks in Colorado did a really good job recognizing that. As I mentioned to you earlier, how many times do we wish that we had a system that allowed us to work together, collaborate, and to be able to share that information? All these organizations we work really well together in the response phase, but when you come to databases, you've got the ETO, which is owned by Catholic Charities, and they can't share their information. That's really, thank you very much.
Efforts to outcomes.
Yeah, you're going to shoot me in just another minute. Then we've got the Red Cross that has their own database, and they can't share their information. But what we did with Vision Link, so you know, is that with Vision Link, not only do our partners all use it in the local assistance centers and then what we call the Hope City Disaster Resource Village, we all gather that information and they get all their data back. So we have a system that we're using in the response phase, but as we move, the challenge that you have is you got FEMA that has their privacy, and they won't share information with us unless they have a contract with our friends at Catholic Charities or whatever, whoever gets the contract. And then you've got, Red Cross has their privacy scenarios that they go through, and we have to respect those. And we do. I'm with you 100%. I wish there was a way that we could collaboratively have something at the end of the day that encompasses everything, but we're getting there, baby steps. We, at least in the response phase, we now have that that's in place. And I know it's not the answer you're looking for, but unfortunately that is the case, and we'll continue to work together collaboratively to find ways to make it work.
Yeah, and thank you all for your time. We appreciate you joining us today. Adriana, we've got those break. Mike's got questions. Here we go. I'll talk to you later about how to flip the paradigm for data. Sorry, Kevin.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank the panel. They did such a wonderful job. And these folks, they represent you, our VOAD, and the ability. And I'm just curious, for a lot of our local government leaders and our local, did you realize that the VOAD had this many resources? Yeah, no? Maybe I phrased that question wrong. Isn't it nice to know that you have all these resources at your disposal? Yeah. So that's the beauty of the VOAD, is that we are all together. So a couple things here. One, thank you to our speakers today. Thank you all so much for sharing the great work that you get to do, and how we get to do this together. Also want to thank our friends at the Sioux Chief for such a wonderful day here. As we're preparing for next year, looking for topics, one of the things that was suggested is that we cover the funders table and how important the funders table is. And as we're so short on resources, as you heard me say, that it costs us $210,000 to build a home now in California. Long-term recovery groups don't have that kind of money anymore. So we have to come up with new and creative ways. So next year, we're going to really try to focus on the funders table. And we'd love to have your input on what you think as well. We want you to remember there is an evaluation on the Mentimeter. Please, and we want you to be very critical with this, because we have 2 more conferences this week, and we want you all to help set the pace. So we want you to be very honest with your answers on this one. I want to thank Adriana and our NorCal board for the great work that they've done putting this conference together. Very, very tremendous. And the last thing, second to last, is dinner will be served in the dining room. Please take your belongings. The Suchi is going to clean up this room. So take your stuff when we go over to dinner, and make sure that you network. And my final words are, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for allowing us to share with you the good work of what VOADs do.
Thank you.